Okay, that's us now in public session. So members, just move to item number 4, the draft minutes. Can I refer you to draft minutes of proceedings, and that's at page 20 of our pack. Are members content that the draft minutes of the meeting 14th of March are a true reflection of the proceedings? Okay. Number 5, the matters arising. So at point 5.1, there's a response from the BDA at page 27 of the meeting pack to the committee's request for a breakdown of the member states that have ratified the Minamata Convention. Can I ask if members are content that this correspondence is published on the committee web page as evidence received?
Yeah.
Okay. Number 6 then, moving on to it. Published new EU Act 2023 on the labelling of organic pet food. So can I refer members to the relevant papers at page 29 to 46 of the meeting pack? The clerk received correspondence from the Cabinet Office regarding a published new EU Act on the labelling of organic pet food, which the EU intends to seek to add to the list of EU laws applicable here under the Windsor Framework. So the correspondence is at page 32 of your meeting pack. British Government is engaging with the European Commission on this new EU Act and has indicated that it intends to issue a notification that is being considered by the Joint Committee under Article 13.4 of the Framework. That's when an applicability motion process is engaged. So members are reminded that there's no explicit function for the committee to carry out inquiries or any other scrutiny in response to a notification that a new act has been published. Does have a role in looking at proposed new EU acts which are notified by the Cabinet Office, but that's not what this is. This is a published new EU Act that will be notified to the Assembly at the earliest opportunity. However, as a general function of the committee is to examine new EU Acts, there is scope for it to conduct an initial examination on the new Act if it so wishes. So, can I seek members' views on whether the committee should conduct an initial examination of the Act to inform a possible plenary debate on any applicability motion brought before the Assembly? Go ahead, David.
We would have some concerns, Chair, around the labelling implications of it in terms of, and I think it's right the government are looking at the implications for the sort of internal trade here, because I think GB already has an agreement with the EU that would allow their products to enter the EU without compulsory EU labelling, and therefore it would expose our companies, I think, to an unfair sort of cost implication there as well relative to their GB competitors. So we do have some concerns, and that might be an idea to have a look at that in case something does come.
So, I mean, are members content that we can't do it, as we all know, we can't do an inquiry, we can do some investigative work.
Yes.
To that purpose, are people happy that we write to the relevant departments via the Executive Office to complete an assessment of impact template and potentially invite officials to give evidence on the 11th of April? Okay. Are members content, John, that we maybe raise is asked to identify a short focus list of key representatives of businesses, yes, just as you've outlined, affected by or potentially affected by the Act, who could be affected so that we have that information as well?
It's just as a point of inquiry. I think it's important that this is coming to us with foreknotice to be able to do something like this. So it's obviously a different approach than the previous applicability motion. Was that a conversation had, or is this going to be the set sort of function that we will be receiving before? I think the last time the first we heard of it was whenever our clerk was given notification that it had.
Yeah.
I was going to suggest, because that was my next thing once we agree this, that in terms of nailing down the process, yeah, that rather nearly than official, yeah, to official, that we write back to the Cabinet Office and kind of invite any future correspondence to be from a minister to myself as chair of the committee, just that we're notified of anything that's coming.
I think it's more appropriate to go through the elected chair in terms of then notification to the committee. But I'm just wondering in terms of process, because this is not exactly the same as what came before. Is this we want more involvement? Is this? I'm just curious.
I think what you're asking is whether this is going to be the way forward. I'm not sure, but that's something we can clarify. And if members wanted to express that desire to get almost a pre-notification in circumstances where we haven't considered the new Act at pro stage, we can certainly put that to Cabinet Office.
Declan, you?
Yeah, I think, Marie, anything that can be put in place that maximises that pre-notification space, giving the committee as an entity as much advance foresight as possible, will aid the overall scrutiny process that we want to conduct. And if we can use this through consultation between yourself and the relevant other officials to put in place what would be a template, a model for going forward, I think consistency in this case is our friend, as long as the consistency matches with those parameters of maximum foresight and then the facility to engage in maximum oversight.
Patrick?
Thanks, Chair, and agree with the comments before in terms of receiving that early information. But wanted to make another point just about, obviously, we hopefully didn't have a precedent being set with the first applicability motion in terms of that being brought by individual members instead of FMDFM, which would be the expectation laid out in the documents we have, even if it's not a requirement. But with the second of this in front of us, I'm wondering if there is scope for this committee to write to the Executive Office to ask for clarity on how they intend to approach the applicability motions going forward, if they do intend to table it within the 2 weeks, or are we going to have the scenario each time where it is a bit of a free-for-all amongst members to actually table something. I laid out in my comments in the Chamber that I think it would have been preferable to have that leadership from the top in terms of the expected process, but it would be good to see potentially some clarity from the Executive Office on that, I think.
Okay, so I'm just conscious that we're kind of discussing three things at once. I want to nail them down first and foremost. So going back a couple of steps, can we just take agreement with regard to the pet food stuff that we will seek information from Ray's and we will write to the department? Everybody's agreed on that.
Yep.
Second thing now was, I can't remember now what the second sorry, the second thing was yes, the approach to this. So just to paraphrase, what I think we're agreeing is that the clerk will write back to the Cabinet Office and have some engagement about a process where we will continue to get sort of advanced foresight, and that my and Jonathan's point that process should ultimately involve then the Minister sending the correspondence to myself as chair of the committee. Are we agreed that that's okay? So then we're now on to the third point, which is Patrick. So if anybody wants to comment.
Yeah, no, and I can understand how that might make the process more clear and distinct, but the regulation is very, very clear. If it's not brought by OFM-DFM, it's up to an individual member or members to bring an applicability motion. That's very clear in the regulation, so I don't think that I would be in a comfortable space to write to OFM-DFM to tell them that you must or you should bring an applicability motion. That's just my space on the content of what the regulation.
Worth clarifying, I wasn't saying that this committee should try and set out a direction necessarily, but perhaps that we should seek clarity from Executive Office in terms of how they intend to approach it,
Okay.
rather than directing them.
I suppose probably my thought process, and that would be, as is every single individual issue that will come, we've already seen they're so varied. It's dog food today, it was craft products yesterday or the day before. I'm losing track of dates. I suppose probably their views will probably change given independent upon the issue, but I think the ability for, as set out in the regulation, for individual members is clearly defined, and that process will probably be used again.
I don't think we'd be expecting FMDFM to be taking a stance in any way. It's the same way as your party obviously brought the motion but voted it down, as is your right. So we're not expecting to take a stance, but in terms of process, whether or not they are going to table the motion to allow for that debate in the Chamber, I think it would be useful to get some sort of direction.
Do you mean as in they would notify the committee that they're not going to bring one?
Potentially. I mean, potentially the reason the first one was missed was because of oversight or lack of familiarity with the process. So it would be useful to know if those processes are being ironed out on Executive Office's end. It was the first one, so it may have been a hiccup, but I just think for consistency going forward, it might be useful to get some clarity on that.
Well, I suppose the clerk needs to be clear exactly what it is. I mean, are you suggesting that we reissue the legislation and guidance in terms of an applicability motion and maybe seek some response to that?
Just outline obviously what happened with the first applicability motion wasn't brought within the 2 weeks deadline, and just ask, is this potentially something that they weren't aware of, or was it a decision not to bring it?
It is their right not to bring it if they don't wish to bring it. I think that's probably very clear in the regulation. If they choose not to, I don't think there's anything in regulation to say that they must notify the committee or anybody else upon their decision. But upon the 2 weeks following, it is then open to any individual member of the Assembly whom receive notification from the clerk as to the applicability motion. I think it was on sometime in February 21st maybe, that all members received the correspondence.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's actually. I mean, obviously MLAs get the opportunity for written and oral questions. I think that might be a better opportunity, Patrick, with regard to this. I'm just not sure how it's the role. I mean,
I suspect you just get a restatement of what
Absolutely.
the legislation says. You'll not get anything substantive that will deliver what I think you're asking for.
It just does raise the question of why the expectation is on them in the first place. Not the requirement, but the expectation that they bring it within 2 weeks. Why is that there if it's not going to be used? It just seems like a bit of an anomaly if it is just going to fall after 2 weeks.
and I suspect they will look at these things individually. And I mean, I have no idea why they didn't bring it. As David says, I'm not sure.
We're all learning,
they're going to tell
obviously.
us.
So
I suppose even in that sense, even in terms of bringing the applicability motion as it has to be in the affirmative sense, there's questions around that as well as to, well, if you don't agree with it being applied, why should it be brought in an affirmative to then have to vote against if that's your feeling or view? So there's a lot of probably unanswered questions there in terms of the process.
I think that applies to most legislation. In that
Well,
regard
Yeah,
as
but
well.
it's still,
I suppose
Please,
ultimately, whatever decision was taken in the Executive Office, we don't know why. I mean, it's our right to know why, and whatever went on in there. However, I think the key issue for us is understanding what the issues are and the impact on the people of Northern Ireland, so that whenever we actually debate it, I mean, I think there was some elements on Tuesday where it was difficult because we hadn't really given much thought to what the impact of that may be. And had to do some digging. So I think we're in a position now where it's more helpful to have stuff in advance so that we can be fully aware and make informed decisions about these issues and have an informed debate about these issues, more importantly, and that can take us, kind of going forward. I understand what you're saying, Patrick, about the Executive Office, but the Executive Office is a fathomless mystery to most. So I just think that we're better to focus on the work that we need to do and what we need to get from other people, so that as best we can be, we are informed about the processes and the impacts.
Sensing there isn't.
I'm sure, Patrick.
agreement, so-
I'm sure the Executive Office will get asked that question at some point.
I do have a ministerial question coming up. So
well, there you go.
Not for me to tell you how to use it.
They're listening in.
You'll get in
It
the
wasn't the one I had planned. That's all.
Okay, we're moving on then. So, let me just see where I'm at here. Okay, are members content that going back 2 items onto the pet food, that once we receive the assessment from the departments, etc., on the impact, that there's a link to Hansard's is circulated to all members and published to the committee webpage to help inform any applicability motion debate. Okay, and then so we've also then agreed that the clerk will contact the Cabinet Office in terms of what we have agreed to be the process moving forward, or to work out a process moving forward. So item number 7 then, the draft committee engagement education programme. Can I refer members to the briefing paper at page 48 of your meeting pack and ask Sinead to speak to this?
Yes, so members, on page 48 there is a proposed engagement and education programme for the committee. So there's sort of 2 elements, the first being the education and then engagement with Westminster bodies and those in Brussels. The first 3 items we've already covered in our meeting today, which was the engagement with the House of Lords, and then we'll meet with the House of Commons Committee over lunch, and then the briefing from the EU Affairs team. We're then proposing 2 separate training sessions to be delivered by the CAM Central Committee Office in the Assembly. The first one relates to effective questioning, some of which will be tailored to the specific needs of this committee. Then a proposed brief introduction for members to the members portal on Assist, which will also have specific pages tailored to the work of this committee for reference by all members of the Assembly. Today's introductory meetings with the Westminster committees would then precede a formal visit to Westminster in June with the House of Lords and House of Commons Committee, and a meeting with the delegation of the EU to the UK and the European Parliament Liaison Office. So that would be to discuss work on building, strengthening relationships post-Brexit and wider stakeholder engagement. Finally, we're proposing a visit to Brussels in the autumn time. So that would include engagement with the Executive Office in Brussels, the UK mission to the EU, the Scotland Office, and permanent representation of Ireland to the EU. And it's also intended that that visit would include engagement with engagement around the EU Commission's work programme whenever it's developed. And in relation to those visits, a more detailed itinerary will be brought forward for agreement by the committee.
Everybody content? Okay, thank you, Sinead. Thank you for that work as well. Item number 8, correspondence. Point 8.1, we've all received correspondence from the World Alliance for Mercury-Free Dentistry. That's at page 51 of the meeting pack regarding the proposal on amalgam, or sorry, it's the proposal to regulate mercury. So this follows last week's oral briefing from the BDA on the proposed EU Act. Can I ask members if they're content, given the anticipated notification of the proposed EU Act in the near future, to invite representatives from the World Alliance of Mercury-Free Dentistry to also give oral evidence to the committee via Zoom as part of its evidence gathering exercise?
That makes sense, yeah.
Happy? Okay, so are members also content that the correspondence is published as evidence received? Okay, just to remind everybody that the evidence received from the BDA was brought to the attention of relevant departments, committees and the Joint Consultative Working Group. So just for balance, are members content that this evidence is also sent to those bodies?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. 9 is chairperson's business, which I have none. And 10 is any other business. No other business. So date, time and place of next meeting. Just to inform members, because we obviously had a discussion about pause notifications, we've received no notifications, therefore we don't need to meet next Thursday. So the next meeting is Thursday 11th of April 2024, 10 AM here, so we can all enjoy our Easter break. So adjourn the meeting.
Sure.
Committee Room 30, sound.